So, I just want to say how proud I am that we have now done 2 field trips, and no one has run off yet. So that's good. Today, in addition to being World Community Sunday, we get to talk about a section of Scripture you might call the Covenant and the Commandments. That's actually the title that the narrative lectionary gave this part, so I'm not creative enough to come up with that on my own. But it is. It talks about the covenant and the commandments. Now, you may remember that this past summer, we did a sermon series on the 10 Commandments, or the 10 words, as we talked about them. So, since we did that sermon series this summer, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the commandments today, or the words today. But we are going to talk about the covenants today. And specifically, we're going to talk about how bizarre it is that God continues to renew this covenant with these people. So, the kids didn't remember going to the font. Does anybody remember what we talked about last week? And you'll wonder where they get it. Anybody remember? Water. Yeah. What happened? Water that goes... Yeah, Red Sea, thank you. A new member got us. And Moses, good, very good, so proud of you. All right, so last week we talked about Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt through the waters of the Red Sea. Now, it's about a 3-month gap between what we talked about last week and what we are talking about today. And you have to give the Israelites credit for what they did as soon as they crossed to the other side of the Red Sea. But that's kind of where the credit needs to stop, because then it was just a bunch of complaining. So as soon as they crossed the Red Sea, the first thing they did exactly what we should do every time we realize that God has been involved in our lives, and every time we realize that God is responsible for saving us. They sang praises to God. An entire chapter out of the book of Exodus dedicated to singing praise to the glory and the power of God. And then 3 days later, they started complaining. 3 days later, they go to a place called Marah, and they complain. There's water there, but the water is bitter. So they complain to Moses, and Moses, with the power of God and a stick, turns the bitter water to sweet water, and the people are able to drink. About a month and a half goes by, and they start quarreling this time. They are quarreling with one another. They are quarreling with Moses because they say to Moses, "Why did you bring us up out of the land of Egypt where there was more than enough to eat, so that we might die of starvation in the wilderness?" They are saying they would have rather stayed back in slavery in Egypt and have plenty to eat than to starve to death in the wilderness. Well, God hears their complaining, and this is where manna comes in. God sends manna, that heavenly, sweet, and spicy bread that rests down upon the ground every morning so that the Israelites can gather it up and always have more than enough to eat. And in the evening, God would send quail, the meat that they could gather in and eat every day. Never again, while they're in the wilderness, would they have to worry about having food to eat. And then they started complaining again, because this time they got thirsty again. They ran out of water again. And they are quarreling and complaining so much to Moses and his brother Aaron that Moses actually says to the people, "Why do you test the Lord your God?" That didn't stop them. They keep complaining. And so through Moses, God has Moses take his staff and hit a rock and makes water gush forth so that they have plenty to drink. Now, in addition to this, there's a little bit of a battle. Joshua is sent out against Amalek to fight against, the Amalekites. And thanks again to Moses and God's help, keeping Moses' arms up, they're able to prevail in battle. And after that, we have a family visit for Moses. His father-in-law comes to visit, Jethro. When Jethro comes to visit, he brings with him Moses' wife and 2 sons. While Jethro is there visiting Moses, he recognizes that every time a dispute arises among the Israelite people, they take that dispute to Moses and let Moses be the arbiter, the judge between them. And evidently, there are quite a few disputes. Because witnessing this, Jethro says to Moses, "If you keep this up, it will wear you out." So, these people whom God has saved from Pharaoh's army through the waters of the Red Sea, who did give thanks in that instance, according to Scripture, have not given thanks since. Since then, they have been a complaining, quarreling, disputing, disgruntled people. And yet still, God reaffirms the covenant with them. God says to them, "Thus you shall say to the people, I will renew my covenant with them." That is not what God said. But it was something along those lines. I just can't find the quote here. But the key word in all this is reaffirm. God agrees to reaffirm the covenant with the people. Not even agrees, but God reaffirms the covenant with God's people. And this is a covenant that goes way back. You see, God is not creating a new covenant with a new people. God is reaffirming an old covenant with an old people. Now, we've talked about covenant before. We talked about it a few weeks ago. And we talked about a covenant as an agreement between 2 or more parties, but it's more than just an agreement. It is a sacred agreement that talks about a relationship among people. And in this case, it is a covenant that is between God and God's people. This covenant goes all the way back to Abraham and maybe even further. Maybe it goes all the way back to Noah. Y'all remember talking about Noah? Okay, now you're understanding why we come every week to learn about the Bible and worship God. Right, so a few weeks ago we talked about Noah. And after the flood, when God made a covenant with all flesh, with all creation, vowing to never again wipe out all flesh through the waters. And then later, God expands on that covenant. But here, we have God almost reaffirming that covenant as well, because God could give that covenant over all creation, because all of creation is God's. God says here, when speaking to Moses, "Indeed, the whole earth is mine." God has the authority to make a covenant with all creation. Later, God made a covenant with Abraham. God said to Abraham, "I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to the people of the earth." And then later, God expands on this covenant and tells Abraham, "Not only is my covenant with you, but it is with you and all of your descendants, now and for forevermore." These are Abraham's descendants. These people who have been behaving badly in the wilderness, these are Abraham's descendants, whom God has agreed to make a covenant with since way before they were born. But they have been behaving so badly, it is almost as though they are trying to get out of that covenant with God because they're trying to get God to break up with them. Y'all have any friends like that ever? Who they might be in a relationship and they knew the relationship needed to end, but they didn't want to be the one to end it, so they would try to act bad enough that the other person would end it? Yeah, I had a friend like that in high school. It made no sense whatsoever to me. Instead of him just saying to his girlfriend, maybe we shouldn't date any longer, he'd be a bad boyfriend. I'm not saying he would cheat on her or anything like that, but he would just be rude. He would be rude. He would not answer her phone calls. He would forget about dates that they had planned. He would just be rude in the hopes that she would eventually break up with him. So he didn't have to do it. Really dumb plan. Well, if that is what the Israelites are doing here, God is not playing along. God refuses to break up with them. Every year on Mother's Day, the one thing I do every year on Mother's Day is I read the book, The Runaway Bunny. Y'all familiar with that book? If not, there's your pitch to be here on Mother's Day. We're going to read that for the time for young disciples. Runaway Bunny is, I know this is going to sound like a shocker to you, it's about a little bunny that wants to run away. The whole story is about this little bunny and his mother. And the bunny throughout the whole story decides that he's going to run away and tells his mother that he is going to run away. And when he does, his mother says, well, if you run away, then I will run after you. And the rest of the story is the runaway bunny coming up with more elaborate and imaginative ways to get away from his mother. And he'll say things like, well, if you're going to run after me, then I'll become a fish. And she says, well, then if you're going to be a fish, I will be a fisherman and fish for you. Okay, then I'm going to be a plant in a garden. Well, then I'll be a gardener. Then I'm going to join the circus and fly away on a flying trapeze. Well, then I will be a tightrope walker and will walk across the air to you. Finally, he gets the point. No matter what, his mother is going to be coming after him. No matter what, his mother is not going to give up on him. The covenant that God made with God's people is not a new covenant. It is a subset within a much more ancient covenant. And God's covenants are everlasting. The covenant that God reaffirms this day with the people of Israel when they're in the wilderness is an everlasting covenant. He reaffirms it because they need to be reminded of God's promises. We need to be reminded of God's promises every once in a while. When God begins the reaffirmation, God says to Moses, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. In those words, God reminds the Israelites of their ancestry, of their ancestor Jacob, who is named Israel, who is the grandson of Abraham, whom God made the covenant with, who said, I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to all the peoples of the earth. And if that wasn't enough, God reminds them how God rescued them out of Egypt and bore them up on eagle's wings. They needed to be reminded of all that God had done for them. When people join our church, we do a reaffirmation of the baptismal covenant. Do you ever wonder why we do that? Because we need to be reminded of God's promises in our lives. We need to be renewed in the promises of God from time to time. Which is also why when people are baptized, it is a community event. It is never a private event in baptism. Baptism is for the community. It is not just for the individual who is being claimed by God, but it is also for the community so that we may all remember that God has claimed us once and for all. That we too are a part of that everlasting covenant and that God will never let us go. At the end of the runaway bunny, the bunny realizes that no matter what, his mother will continue to reaffirm her love and devotion to him. And finally he says, spoiler alert by the way, aw shucks, I guess I'll just stay here and be your little bunny. Because his mother was relentless in reaffirming her love for her son. God is relentless in reaffirming the promises of the covenant with God's people. And we too are God's people. The covenant with Abraham and all of Abraham's descendants was God saying, I will bless you and you will be a blessing to all the earth. That's what the reaffirmation says today. Today, when God reaffirms the covenant, God says, I will bless you. You are called to be a holy priesthood. We are part of that holy priesthood. And to be part of that holy priesthood means that even though I'm wearing the robe, I'm not the only one whom God calls. We are all called to be that priesthood. In technical, traditional terms, we say that a priest is a mediator between God and the people. As part of God's people, as part of that holy priesthood, we are called to be a blessing to the world. God's covenant is an everlasting covenant. God is relentless in reaffirming that covenant with us. But part of that covenant is that we are called not only to be blessed by God, that in and of itself is great, but it's also selfish. But to be a blessing to the world. Amen?